Good afternoon. It's kind of late in the day, and I can understand that you guys are all a little bit tired. But I hope to infuse a little bit of enthusiasm into this, and I hope we'll have a good session. So, thanks to the organizers for inviting me to come here and offer this lab. And I'm actually not a full time professor at IIMB, I'm an adjunct faculty. I teach innovation, and I'm in the strategy area there. In your handouts, they have a picture of me, but actually it's somebody else. Okay. There is another Professor Srinivasan at IIM Bangalore. He's a full-time faculty, so his information is there. So this is me, not him. Okay. So what is the whole point that we're going to look at here? Okay. The idea is that there are some concepts in business that are very relevant to conflicts between nations. And I want to concentrate on that fact and drive this lab based on that. Okay, here's my agenda. So first we'll do a little bit of an overview of the why we're doing this and the session plan. Since I've got like exactly 1 hour, I want to go through it fairly quickly. And we'll touch upon 3 or 4 concepts, maybe 5 concepts in negotiation, game theory, etc. But the core of this session is going to be this team exercise where I want you to participate in a hands-on manner, okay? And then we'll have a little bit of time for feedback. So, interestingly enough, you know, business strategists have been stealing, if you will, from military strategy. Those of you who are aware of the whole discipline of business strategy may be aware that there was a gentleman named Michael Porter at Harvard Business School who's sort of the guru of business strategy. And much of the literature in that area stems from war games that Porter and other people studied. You know, they looked at what Patton did or earlier conquerors did and so forth. But it also turns out that in a nice, not ironic, but nice poetic fashion, those things are now able to come back from the business world to the world of national conflict and national competition and so forth. So we'll do a very brief introduction to some of those topics. So this is the way I'm going to do this. Okay, I'll speak a little bit, about 15 to 20 minutes. And the reason I said to Apur that let me do the renumbering is because I thought you were going to be 60 people, but there's now, a little bit less. I want to have 6 teams, though. So if it's 45 people, we'll have, 7 or 8 teams. And then we have a very brief time for this hands-on negotiation. As you can see, 5 minutes to prepare, 5 minutes to come up with an offer, 5 minutes to negotiate, and 5 minutes to come back and think about it. Okay? And a typical negotiation, it would be weeks, right? Instead of minutes, it would be weeks. But do not be alarmed by the fact that it's minutes. It turns out that you can do a lot in 5 minutes if you put your mind to it. Okay? Now I'll come back to that in a minute, and then a little bit of a summary and what we learned from that. So that's what I'm planning to do in this session. Okay. So the first topic, which is obviously the one that's closest to the diplomatic issue, is negotiation strategy. The 2 or 3 key takeaways. The first is that in every negotiation, there are interests and positions. And they do not coincide. Okay? You will have an interest. This is the thing that you want. You absolutely have interests. But you will go round and round that interest and come up with a position. Right? Because you typically will conceal your interest. That's how most people are. Like, for example, if you're going to, let's take a simple example. If you're buying a car, right? I mean, you really like the fact that it's got, I don't know, LED headlamps or something. That's what really attracts you to it. But you won't say that. You'll say, oh, I like the engine torque or something like that, right? Because people will conceal their true interests at all times. So the idea in a negotiation is to come up with positions but conceal your interests and understand the other guy's interests. So we've got to do everything you can to make that little, how shall I put it, subterfuge work. So we have to know for that, we need to know exactly what our interests are. We have to be very, very clear about our interests. Okay, this is what we want to accomplish. And we try to poke and understand the other guy's interests. There is also one more factor. We are here negotiating because we know something the other guy doesn't know. If there is perfect information, there's no need to negotiate. Right? If they know everything you know and you know everything they know, right? Then it's simple. There's no negotiation. You just sign an agreement and walk away. The reason you're negotiating is because there is some unknown information. There's information asymmetry, right? So your goal is to maintain that asymmetry. You don't reveal your interests, but you want to dig up their interests. So typical negotiation strategy suggests that you go into a negotiation after having arrived at 3 positions. Okay? The first position is the desirable position, which is what you would love to have. If you got this, you're like in clover. You are gold, right? You have done it. But it almost never happens because the other guy is also not dumb, right? The other party is not stupid. But you want to aspire to that desirable position. So that you write down. You make it very clear to yourself. Second is the point of indifference, where it's okay. I mean, I can live with this. I'm not very happy with it. But it's okay if I go back to my boss and say, this is the final negotiated settlement that we have, right? And in fact, most of the time, you end up in a negotiation with somewhere above that point of indifference. Why? Because that is a give and take situation. You are giving some, taking some, and walking away with something you can live with, right? Then there is a third point where this is unacceptable. I can't have this. This outcome, not acceptable. If I go back to my boss with this outcome, I'll be fired or worse. Something terrible is going to happen to me, right? So what you do is you write these down. You arrive at these 3 positions, write them down very clearly, memorize them, and then when you go into the negotiation, do not ever go below your indifference point. Your opponent will try to make you do that. Your opponent will make up all kinds of, pressure, right? I mean, this is, for example, real estate negotiation, right? You got to do the deal today, or something is going to happen. You got to do this now, or whatever, right? If you've ever bought a car, for example, or anything, there is pressure on you to say, just do it now, we'll give you a discount, whatever, right? Because all that's trying to do is to move your acceptance or indifference point down, make you give up more. Okay, but if you have arrived at that consensus amongst yourself and you'll absolutely stand by it, you will not lose. And the third thing you can do is you apply psychological tactics in reverse. Most people are much more comfortable negotiating point by point. Don't go for that. You offer a package deal. This and that and that. But what's clever about it is that this, that and the other put together is above your acceptable or point of indifference. And there is still some room for you to give away. Right? So that confuses the other guy. So you got these points, I hope, right? Interests versus positions, and define your positions and be absolutely clear that you will walk away if it goes below the acceptance or acceptable point of view. If you do that, and you must be prepared to walk away. You must be prepared to walk away, okay? Otherwise, they're going to out-negotiate you, okay? So that's the crux of the matter here. Second is the topic of game theory. How many of you are familiar with game theory here? Several of you, okay? And there is one game called the prisoner's dilemma, which is the one that people tend to talk about most. I'm not going to go into that in great detail, but the idea in a prisoner's dilemma is that you have two people who have been caught doing something, okay, something bad. Now, if they cooperate and both deny that they have done it, then they get off with a light sentence because they're not implicating each other. That means they're cooperating with each other, right? But if one of them betrays the other, the betrayed guy gets a big sentence, right? And the betrayer walks away. Okay. Third is if they betray each other, they get a moderate sentence. The problem is that they're held incommunicado. They're held in solitary. You don't know what the other guy is going to do, right? And the police will come and keep telling you, oh yeah, that guy's already betrayed you. You might as well betray him. So you're in this situation where you have incomplete information and you're nervous and scared. And what you typically end up doing is you make a rational choice, which often is not the optimal choice. What is the optimal choice here? You both support each other. So you get off lightly, right? That is the rational choice. But because of the pressure and your doubts about the other guy, you have no idea what he's going to do. He may be your buddy, but you don't really trust him that much, right? So that's the crux of the prisoner's dilemma, which is that rational economic beings may make suboptimal decisions based on the complexity of the situation. Okay, that's one point. So again, game theory is a big area and there's a very, very quick introduction to it. The second question about the prisoner's dilemma is this a one-time deal? That is, you'll never see that guy again. You have, this one time that you're involved with them and that's it forever. Okay? If that's the case, the optimal tactic is X. If on the other hand, it's going to be a repeated deal, okay, then the optimal tactic is another. Okay? Now, most sales situations, right? Many sales situations are one-time deals. You'll never see that person again, right? For example, if you're a train traveler and you go somewhere and the guy sells you something, maybe it's it's bad food or something. He doesn't care because he knows you'll never see him again, right? On the other hand, if you're a person in a company who's a salesman who's selling industrial equipment, you got to come back and deal with the same customer over and over again. So there are different tactics for both these situations. Is this reasonably clear? The idea of prisoner's dilemma? Okay. Third, how many of you have heard of strategic intent? None. Okay. This is from a gentleman named C.K. Prahlad. Have you heard that name, C.K. Prahlad? He was one of the foremost management thinkers of his generation. He was an absolutely outstanding man. He died, unfortunately, rather early. So he has come up with this concept of a strategic intent. Now, many companies talk about vision, mission, things like that. Now, vision typically is a very broad statement. For example, Google's vision statement is organize the world's information. That's nice, but it's not really meaningful, is it? It's kind of vague. Or somebody may have, mission statement, a vision statement saying end world poverty or whatever, right? So those are nice sounding platitudes which are difficult to quantify, right? So a strategic intent is a quantifiable, time-bound goal, okay, which looks like a stretch goal. You will not automatically get to that goal if you do nothing. You got to work hard at it, right? And it's something that inspires people. It makes you sit up and think. And I'll give you one example of what I thought was an excellent strategic intent, which is the Tata Nano, right? What Ratan Tata had in mind was this inexpensive, affordable vehicle that could help almost anybody who's struggling with, two kids on a motorbike, right? And saves you from the elements and, gives you a certain amount of prestige, perhaps. That was the intent. And so when he first mooted it, everybody said, that's not possible. What do you mean a 1 lakh car? Impossible, right? But you know what? It became the mantra for Tata Motors, right? And the engineers actually figured out ways of doing it. Well, maybe not 1 lakh, 1.5 lakhs, 2 lakhs, something like that, right? And they did it. Engineering-wise, it was a superlative car, okay? But marketing-wise, it flopped. Correct? For some extraneous reasons. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you set up this superordinate goal, which gets people excited, they get very creative. So, for example, in the Nano, you don't have 2 wipers, you only have 1 wiper. Turns out that's good enough. Right? Works just fine. And so on and so forth. The number of engineering things that you did. So that is an example of a strategic intent. Another strategic intent that I'll just mention in passing is, many years ago, there were 2 big competing companies, and they were about the same size. One of them was NEC from Japan, and the other was GT Sylvania from the US, right? And what NEC did is it looked out a few years and said, today we are here, but if we work at it, we can get there. And so they said, so our goal, so their intent was, we want to be one of the world's top companies in semiconductors, in telecom, and in electronics, right? They said that. They thought things through and said that. And they kept on increasing their capability in those areas. Whereas GTE didn't do any of those things. And 10 years later, in fact, NEC had reached that position. They were one of the world's top players in all 3, and GTE was nowhere. So the idea here is a stretch goal. It may not look like it's feasible today. I'll give you another stretch goal that I keep suggesting to my students, or we discuss with my students. What should be India's goal in the next 10 years? I want to know what you guys think. Any thoughts? What should India think? Something that's desirable, makes you excited. It's not easy to get there. What should India's goal be? Top class education, okay. It's a good goal. Poverty line, okay. Yeah? In the Southwest Asia region. Okay. See, these are all good goals. In my opinion, they're too low. The bar is too low. You said education. We should aim for the #1 country in education. Right? You said raise people out of poverty. I would put it in terms of we should be a middle income country by 2025 or something. And instead of, why Southwest Asia or Southeast Asia? Why not the world? Why shouldn't we be aspiring to be #1 in the world? Why not? If we aspire to #1, we may be #2 or #3. But if we aspire to #4, we'll be #4, right? So that's what I'm talking about. Intent, goal, vision, right? See, if you say your intent, you intend to be #1 in the world. 20 years ago, China said that. Everybody laughed. I remember, because 20 years ago, I wrote an article saying that this is the danger from China. Okay? And actually, that's the reason I'm here. Although my background is in business and so forth. I've been a foreign policy columnist for 20 years, and I'm one of the few people who can, let me puff myself up a little bit. I was one of the few people who predicted that Mr. Modi would win here, and that Brexit would happen, and that Trump would win. 3 out of 3. So I like to contrast myself with the Economist magazine, which got 0 out of 3. Okay, so yeah, so what I saw was this determination on the part of the Chinese, right? They said, this is where we're going to go. We're here now. Yes, we're small fry, but we'll get there. I'm saying we should do that. Yes, we're small fry. Incidentally, even if we don't do anything much, just because of momentum and mass, we will get to be number 3. Right? You must have read all these analyses by Goldman Sachs and whatnot. They're saying we'll get to number 3 by 2025 or 30. But my question is, why not number 1? Right? See, literally 20 years ago, nobody thought China would rise so much. Right? And now India is up. Anyway, so that's about strategic intent. So we want to identify what we have, our resources and capabilities. We identify the end goal, and people will be creative about how to get there. So you tell them what and why you want to get to, right? And then people figure out how. There are some, various means of doing this. Find areas where the other guys are not focusing, and also you can, change the rules of the game. Today, India has, in my opinion, a historic opportunity, because I am of the opinion that, how many of you are familiar with the Thucydides trap? Thucydides trap? No, you've not heard of it? Several of you, right? What it says is that when there is a rising power and then there is an incumbent power, they will 50-50 chances, or even 70-30 chances they'll go to war. Okay? Somebody's done a lot of research on that. Now, if that happens, what should we do? Right? We should quietly stay on the sidelines, right? Let them fight it out and see if we can prosper in the meantime. That's one example of a tactic that we can follow. Now, this question of an emergent strategy. When you talk about strategy in general, what we typically have is this grand strategy, right? We have planned this and we have planned that, the way China does, right? But it's also possible to have a more flexible strategy, which happens through mid-course pivots. Something useful happens and you pivot, right? You adjust accordingly. So I've just given a couple of examples of that from the business world. So this is about strategic intent, which I think is a very, very powerful idea. And by the way, the last slide here that I have has some other background reading if you're interested in following up on any of these topics. So this is from Prahlad. Another brilliant topic from Prahlad was about core competence. See, all of us have competencies individually, and as nations we have competencies. Okay? But some competencies are more useful than others. So here's the idea of core competencies, which basically says, what is it that you're really, really, really good at, right? And that has to have some meaning that should be useful. He gives 3 criteria for a core competency. One is, can you use that again and again, right? You use that to win here, and then you use that to win there, and you use this to win in this third instance. And one example of that is Canon, the company Canon. What is Canon's core competency? What's Canon really good at? Optics, right? Actually, they're good at optics and electronics. So what did they first do? Cameras, like Nikon also, cameras. What do they do next? They make the engines of printers. If you have a laser printer, chances are that it's made by Canon. It says HP or something on the outside, but inside it's Canon, right? So they have taken advantage of their core competency there. Third is, in semiconductor making, you need very, very precise optics, okay, because you're etching, 0.6 micron lines on semiconductor. You need extremely precise optics to focus X-rays and stuff like that. Canon's a world leader in that. So you see, they've leveraged their optics and electronics competence in many, many cases. And they'll keep on doing that as opportunities arise. So that's one thing that you can do to be that's a core competence. Second is that competence clearly has value as far as other people are concerned. They can see that it's something that's got value and it's not something that others can easily copy. So if you have these three things, you have a core competence, again from Prahlad. And finally, design thinking is a technique. Anybody heard of this? Several of you have heard of this. It became popular after, what's that guy's name? Infosys, the former head of Infosys. Anyway, so when he became head of Infosys, there was a wave of interest in it. But now actually there's a whole lot of interest in this because it's a problem-solving, it's a problem-solving technique which enables you to think very creatively. Okay, so what you do is you realize that it's not only analytics but also emotional content and psychology that is useful in terms of creating new products, etc. So what you do is you go observe the other side. Okay, meaning who is your customer? The customer may not tell you directly, this is what I want. Customer may not even know what they want, right? But if you observe them carefully, okay, you might be able to figure out what it is that they'll really like. An example is the iPhone. Before the iPhone was invented, nobody knew they needed an iPhone, a smartphone, right? None of us knew that. We were all perfectly happy with our feature dumb phones or whatever. But once this was invented, the customer had this need that Steve Jobs somehow figured out. This concept of understanding the other side, their hidden needs, ties neatly back into what I said about interests. Right? What are they really interested in? So in your negotiation, one of the things I'm going to suggest is you observe the other side carefully. When you make an offer, what is their body language? Right? So you try and identify their interests. And then once you have some idea of what their interests are, you can come up with wild ideas. Okay, even wild ideas, and you do a brainstorming process. And then you quickly cycle through that. You know, you come up with ideas, create prototypes, and then you show the prototype to the user, come back with the feedback and create a new prototype, etc. So it enables you to home in really on what the customer wants or the other side wants.